Very warm welcome to everyone. Great to see you here. Some names are familiar, some aren't. So this is the Evenbreak Explores series where we have experts in and have conversations with them. Quite informal, you can join in too. And just a little bit of housekeeping. We've got a captioner on, so you can put your live transcript. There's a couple of C's along the bottom, or there is at least on my computer, along the bottom menu bar. So if you want the live transcript, then we have Renee doing that for us. So thank you very much. And you'll also notice that we have Carol, who is our BSL interpreter for today. So if you need her services, apparently you can pin her, not her, but her little box to the bottom or the top so that you can see it a bit more clearly than in the little box where she is. We provide BSL and closed captioning as a matter of course, whether people have asked for it or not, because we think it's good practice to make any events that we do accessible. It showcases, how things perhaps could be done, but also it means that if people do have additional requirements for a particular event, they don't always have to tell us, that they don't need to say, I'm deaf, can I have a signer? Because we've already got one here. But we also always ask if there are any other adjustments that anybody needs in order to access our events, because obviously from Evenbreak's perspective, the last thing we want to do is exclude anyone because of inaccessibility. So very warm welcome. Great to see you all here. This is our, I can't remember, fourth or fifth Evenbreak Explores in a series of, and we've got some more coming up. And I'm absolutely thrilled to have Toby Mildon with us today. So I've known Toby for, I think we just worked out, it's about 10 years. It's a very long time. And Toby was working for the BBC then. So I'm going to talk to Toby about his book, really, which is this one. You can see mine's quite a well-thumbed version. And if you haven't got a copy, I do recommend that you buy one. I have it by my side. There's so much just amazing stuff in there. And it's called Inclusive Growth. And I'm really interested to explore with Toby today about that intersection between inclusion and business growth, because the two things I see are kind of inextricably linked. But before we get into the details of that, welcome, Toby. Good to have you here.
Thanks, Jane. Lovely to see you. Thanks for having me along.
Yes, absolutely. Great to have you. And so I've known you for about 10 years, and you were at BBC then, but
yeah,
you were already in accessibility. You were in the digital accessibility inclusion part of the BBC. But what led you into inclusion and accessibility in the first place?
Yeah, so I spent the first half of my career working in technology. I was an IT consultant for Accenture. I worked in healthcare technology, and then I went over to the BBC, and that's where I got involved in accessibility projects. And at the same time, I was working very closely with our chief operating officer within the technology department. And he was concerned with the rest of the senior leadership team that we didn't have enough women working in the department. The BBC at the time had like a 50-50 gender split, but within my technology department, only 14% of our workforce were women. So I worked with the leadership team to come up with a plan to address the gender imbalance. And that was my introduction to diversity.
That's interesting, isn't it? Because I mean, you're intersectional like I am, but actually your first foray into inclusion was around a protected characteristic that you don't have. It was a bit similar with me. Race was my first interest, which is obviously I've never had experience of racism, but it was something that I felt was really crucial and important. And so you've gone from looking at gender imbalance to looking at inclusion in its more broad sense.
Yeah, so once we had got started on the diversity journey within technology, and we were looking at gender, we broadened out to look at other groups. So we looked at race and ethnicity and disability. I, as you mentioned, I have a disability myself. I used to also run the BBC's Disabled Staff Forum, or Disabled Staff Network, and at that point, I realized that I wanted to make a career out of diversity rather than IT project management. So at that time, the timing worked out really well. The BBC had appointed a new head of diversity. So I went to go and work for him in the HR department. And I took on more BBC departments, not just technology. So I looked after radio, which is really interesting because I could look at how people were portrayed on the radio to the audience, and then all of the BBC's corporate functions like finance and HR as well.
I mean, that's interesting, isn't it? Because as you say, it's not just about the background, it's not just about employing people, it's actually about how that diversity of the workforce impacts on the service that's delivered. So in BBC's case, whether it's programming or radios or television programs or whatever it is, actually that has a huge impact, doesn't it, on how we all think about disability and race and all of the other characteristics.
Absolutely. Yeah. And not a lot of organizations think about diversity beyond their four walls. I think it was very clear at the BBC, because the BBC is a public service broadcaster. It's really important to the corporation to reflect the diversity of the nation. But even now, when I talk to a lot of commercial organizations, I remind them that some of their stakeholders are their clients and reflecting the diversity of their client base, but also through their procurement and supply chain channels as well, making sure that they are working with a diverse range of suppliers.
Yeah, that's crucial. That's crucial. I forgot to mention earlier on, but this is a conversation. So if anybody has anything they'd like to add or ask, or or any comments that you'd like to make or examples that you'd like to give, just pop it in the chat, or even unmute and interrupt us. I'm sure we won't mind, but any questions or comments would be fine, and we'll come to those as we go along. But yeah, I think that point about having a diverse workforce has a direct impact then on the product or service that you're delivering, because that internal intelligence will inform how we market what we do, how we produce, how we design. Because if we have the whole population in mind, we're not going to miss certain groups out, and that's crucial. And really, that's really what you talk about in here, isn't it? It's about how do you get all of the benefits of having a diverse workforce in your business growth journey, and I think that's really important. So I love the model, and I love the fact that you've used the 7 C's. That's so it's you can remember what goes on. But what prompted you to write the book itself?
A few things prompted it. I think when I read diversity and inclusion books myself, a lot of the books addressed the why, but they didn't really talk about how. You, as a head of HR or HR practitioner or a D&I manager in an organization, how to actually go about getting diversity and inclusion embedded within the business. Also, a lot of books that I read focused in on kind of a particular group or characteristic. They weren't really talking about how to actually get D&I embedded into like the DNA of the organization. So it got me thinking, and that coupled with my own experiences working in large businesses like the BBC and Deloitte, trying to affect change, thinking about how do we actually get diversity and inclusion implemented in a sustainable way, not just focusing on 1 or 2 protected characteristics, and not trying to kind of fix individuals, but like for trying to address the culture or the I suppose like the structures of an organization. So all of that was floating around my brain, and I was like, how do we make sense of this? And then that's where I came up with the inclusive growth model, which, as you say, has got 7 components to it.
Yeah, and I think that's important, because when we talk, we are sort of looking at one protected characteristic at Evenbreak. We focus on disability, but we're very, very aware of the intersectional nature of that actually disability itself doesn't discriminate. So you can be black or white or gay or straight or old or young or whatever. and that actually we need to make sure that when we're talking about disability, we're not just talking about white male disabled people, we're talking about people who have, intersectional other characteristics as well. But I think what you say is really important, because sometimes when we talk to employers, it's, oh no, because we're doing race this year, and next year we're going to do gender, and then the year after that we're going to do disability, and you kind of think, so if you're a disabled Black woman, which year is your year?
Exactly.
It gets ridiculous, doesn't it, really? And does it mean that when you're doing women, you then forget everything you did on race, and then you do move on to disability? So, and sometimes those things can conflict with each other. So having that kind of holistic approach, which is about including everybody, regardless of those protected characteristics, makes much more sense, doesn't it, really?
It does. And if you think of things in silos, or you take like a hierarchical approach to this, it's just not a very efficient way of working. I've worked in organizations where we've spent a long time developing a career development program for women to get more women to the top of the organization. And then the year after that, we just duplicated that for people, of an ethnic minority background. And then we duplicated it again for disabled people. It's like, I was scratching my head and I was like, why don't we just have one really good inclusive career development program that serves everybody in the organization?
Yeah, that makes much more sense financially and from an inclusion point of view, and from every point of view, really. It's just common sense, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think that's really good. And also, it doesn't exclude anybody, because I think there are sometimes where people will feel, well, I don't have a protected characteristic, so this inclusion stuff doesn't relate to me. But actually, inclusion means everybody. Nobody's excluded. You can be a white, straight, non-disabled man, and you're just as important to the organization as a Black disabled lesbian is. It's actually about inclusion means everybody feeling that they're valued, that they're supported, that they're part of the organization, that they've got something to contribute. So it actually does make much more sense, doesn't it? And it's easier to sell, I think.
Yeah, I mean, Stephen Frost, who he was head of D&I at the Olympic Games, and he's written lots, but one of his sayings is diversity is a given, inclusion is a choice. And I think we are all diverse. Everybody needs to be included. In fact, I designed a course called Diversity Includes Everyone, because that was the point I wanted to get across, that that we have to include everybody on the D&I journey. Because I talk to senior leaders who are feeling disenfranchised, talking about D&I, that it doesn't somehow apply to them, and they feel threatened by diversity and inclusion. And actually, if they're the ones holding the power and the privilege within the organization, then they have to be on this journey. They have to be part of the solution.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, leadership is a key part of it. So we've talked about the inclusive growth model. Could you just do us a whistle-stop tour through what that model looks like?
Yeah, so there are 7 best practices. And if we kind of work from left to right, they are divided into 3 groups of establish, enhance, and enable. So enable and then enhance. So under establish, we talk about clarity and culture. So clarity is about understanding your own business case for diversity and inclusion, getting your hands on diversity data and making sense of that data, and then creating a strategy once you have that clarity. And then culture is about recognizing what behaviors you want in your organization to create the inclusive culture that you really need in your business, and how you can go about that, and how you get your senior leaders really walking the talk. So that's kind of the first area. The second area, which is really about kind of embedding it in the business, I talk about change, colleague experience, and cyber. So within change, I talk about having a proper change management approach to D&I, which is very often missing. And I think one of the biggest frustrations when I talk to D&I practitioners or HR practitioners is that they just get really frustrated with kind of lack of impact that they're making, or they just feel like they're chasing their tails all the time. And And quite often it's because we don't have that kind of change management rigor in
It's
place.
almost seen as something that's retrofitted on, bolted on separately. It's
Yeah.
not within the organization. It's kind of a bit out there somewhere.
Yeah. And so I've worked in HR departments where we've implemented a new payroll system and we've had like proper change management, project management sort of processes in place. But when it comes to D&I, that's missing. You know, we don't know what impact we want to make. We don't know, we're not clear on our resources or stakeholders, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Within colleague experience, this is kind of the crux of the model actually, which is quite different, a different approach, and that's really taking a human-centered approach to D&I. So it's a move away from trying to fix individuals, which we often see like developing a career development program for women, which is trying to fix women by, you know, looking at boosting confidence and things like that, rather than the infrastructure or the systems that are holding people back in their careers.
Yeah, and I think one of the common objectives Abigail has just put in the chat is that sometimes some groups might feel, you know, if we're going to do D&I, does that mean I'm going to lose something? Something's going to be taken away from me. If you're going to give you know, if you're a man and we're giving opportunities to women, does that mean I'm losing out?
Yeah.
Whereas actually inclusion benefits everybody, whichever group you're from, if it's done properly. And as you say, you're looking at things like the colleague experience and how it impacts on everybody within the organization.
Yeah, it does. And I'm working with a client at the moment, and they've got this kind of, the chief executive has got this great philosophy or approach. I call it the flywheel, but there's basically three elements to the wheel. He says if you keep your colleagues or staff happy, that will then deliver a better service to your customers and they will be happy, which in turn develops better returns to your shareholders. So that's his approach. His like, keep your staff happy, your customers will be happy, and then your shareholders will be happy. And
there's no downside to that, is there?
Yeah,
there's absolutely no downside.
It's just a win-win. Yeah. And then the third element of this kind of middle section is cyber. And really that's looking at, first of all, the accessibility of technology, any kind of internal systems that you use or external systems that you use, but also how technology can help deliver diversity. So, you know, there's all sorts of solutions and apps out there. You know, it might be that you use a system to capture microaggressions going on in the business and being able to give you a heat map of what behavior is going on so that you can take targeted action where it's needed.
The technology is really come on, hasn't it? I mean, I know that the pace of change is really quick in this field, but I think it's been accelerated, thinking of accessibility, through the pandemic, because so many people were suddenly working from home, having to use technology to collaborate and work with their team. And suddenly, you know, we were beginning to recognize which tech was accessible and which wasn't. In Evenbreak, we have a couple of the team members who are blind and use screen readers. And so, you know, looking at collaboration tools like Teams, things like this, Zoom, you know, we found that GoToWebinar wasn't very accessible on a screen reader. And it's really interesting how tech can be an enabler, but it can also be a blocker if it's not accessible.
Exactly. And I think the pandemic has only really compounded issues that were already there. You know, loads of organizations have inaccessible learning management systems. You know, I worked in one organization where you know, a member of staff who had a hearing impairment wasn't able to complete the mandatory training because that training just didn't come with subtitles, you know. And I felt really bad for him, because every time he would get a message from HR saying, why haven't you completed your training, you know, and he would get into trouble. And it's like the training just wasn't made accessible in the first place. And
the wrong person gets blamed, don't they? The person who has the access need gets blamed rather than the technology that wasn't there in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. And then in the final section of my model. So the last two areas, I talk about collaboration and celebration. And in that, I talk about the need for the whole of the organization to take responsibility for D&I and not just the HR department. And how you can work more collaboratively with people outside of your organization as well. So other people in your industry or clients or customers, that kind of thing. And then celebration is really about your employer brand, how you can create an inclusive employer brand, how you can get that brand out to the market so that you can be an attractive employer and you attract diverse talent to your business.
And actually that final bit is, it sounds a bit self-indulgent, but it's absolutely crucial, isn't it? Because
it is.
We talk to the employers that use Evenbreak and say, look, you could be the most inclusive employer on the planet, but if candidates don't know that, they're not going to apply. So it's not about being, look how good we are. It's about saying, look, we really have looked at this, we're taking it seriously, and we want your talent. And without doing that, we're not actually going to, we'll have all the systems in place, but we're not actually going to attract the diverse talent that we're looking for.
Yeah, I mean, people won't apply to work for you if they don't see themselves reflected in your business. But when I designed this framework, I deliberately put celebration at the end because so many businesses do the celebration first.
Yes.
And then the reality, though, is that for employees, it's not a particularly inclusive place to work. And in my podcast, I interviewed Sally Bucknell, who's the head of diversity and inclusion at EY, and she called this the rhetoric gap. And EY have actually moved away from submitting awards. They do awards where there's some useful benchmarking involved to benchmark and compare to the market. But actually what they've started to do is empower their people to talk about working for the company through social media at conferences and things like that, rather than trying to go out and win awards.
Definitely. And that storytelling is just so powerful, isn't it? Because, the CEO of the company can say whatever they like about how inclusive they are and how they welcome diverse talent. But actually, as you say, unless you see someone like yourself in the organization, it's just words. We say to our employers, if you have an employee resource group for disabled employees, see if there are people. I mean, not everybody wants to be a poster girl or boy for disability, but if there are people who are happy to share their story, that's so much more powerful than, as you say, a badge somewhere or disability confident or whatever it is. It's almost like kind of TripAdvisor for employers, isn't it? Saying this is real. What we're saying isn't just meaningless words. It's actually true. So what do you think that businesses could gain by going through this inclusive growth model? People who are maybe listening now who are thinking, well, this sounds interesting. It sounds like quite a commitment in terms of looking at all of those different 7 areas broken up into those 3 blocks. What do you think they would gain from going through this process?
Yeah, it can feel overwhelming because there are 7 areas to be thinking about, but really the whole point is to try and get this embedded into the DNA of your business, or just your business as usual way of working. One of the first conversations that we have around this kind of framework is, well, what does growth mean to you? That's why I called it inclusive growth. It was like, how do you want to grow as an organization? And then how is diversity and inclusion going to enable that growth? And I've not yet found a company that doesn't want to grow in some way or another, or cannot make the link to that growth to diversity and inclusion. So I'll give you a couple of examples. I worked with a police force, and for them, growth was about serving what they called underrepresented members of their community better, getting better policing outcomes that they had to report back to government on. And they recognized that if the police force reflected the diversity of the city that they worked in, they would do a better job at policing. And that was, to them, that was growth. I've worked recently with a fintech organization. They've developed a banking app for entrepreneurs, and they've got ambitions to, get their app out to as many entrepreneurs as possible. They recognize that entrepreneurs are a diverse bunch of people, and so they want to grow their business that way. And then when I sat down with the chief executive, she actually realized that when they were starting to engage with underrepresented users, they were actually starting to build a higher quality product because they were getting better feedback from people as well. So
that whole co-production is so important, isn't it? Rather than
yeah,
assuming what people need, but actually bringing them in and saying, look, let's jointly do this to make sure it's right from the start is
exactly.
absolutely
Yeah.
crucial. The police one is interesting at the moment as well, isn't it? Because I think, all public institutions really are there to serve the entirety of the public, not just the bits of the community that look like them. So
exactly.
That's a really, really important one. And as you say, for private organizations, it's about, if you're growing internationally, you might need stakeholders from different countries so that you can learn about different cultures, different ways of working. If you want to grow, if you're a social enterprise like we are, obviously we want to grow financially and geographically and all of those things, but the main thing for us is to grow in terms of impact. And so I can't imagine an organization that doesn't want to improve on what it's already doing. And as you say, actually, inclusion and diversity has to be what's central to that. It's not a bolt-on, well, let's do it and then think afterwards about, what about that group and that group? It's about making sure that's baked in right from the start.
And those are the light bulb moments that a lot of my clients have. Like once I've done like half-day boardroom session with them, I can see it, the chief executive and their senior leadership team, the penny seems to drop for them. They then understand why or how diversity and inclusion links centrally to their business. It's not just this thing that's done on the side of the business or something that should only be left to the HR department to get on with. Those are the magical moments when we get those light bulb moments.
Yeah, definitely. Because I think sometimes inclusion and diversity is seen as something that's a bit pink and fluffy, a bit left wing, a bit woke, a bit not really. It's not really proper business, is it? And it's only when you actually look at. But every business is made up of people who are selling something, whether it's an idea, a product, or a service to other people. And there are multiple other stakeholders involved who are also people that we actually recognize. You can't do that without recognizing, and it's central to finance, to marketing, to design, to procurement, to supply chain. As you say, it's all of those things. It's not something that just should be a little part of HR. And that's when it's never going to work, because people in the organization think, I don't need to worry about D&I because that guy over there in that corner does that for us.
I mean, it's really about investing in people. And I make the point in my book that some research was done that businesses that put people first are more profitable than those organizations that focus on profitability first. And it's quite interesting because I'm working at the moment with a medium-sized manufacturing firm. They're in the middle of Nottinghamshire, so the diversity within their area is not that diverse. And I think about 95% of their staff actually live within a few miles of their factory. So I was having an interesting conversation actually with the chief executive about, well, how much diversity could we expect to get in the business? And the answer is actually, if we're going to reflect the local area, it doesn't appear that that diverse. But we need to be focusing really on inclusion and what kind of environment or culture we want people to move towards. And the reason why he was so interested in this is that a few things have shifted over the last couple of years. One, they are starting to employ people outside of the Nottinghamshire area because of COVID. They've realized that actually they could employ a salesperson who lives in Birmingham or London or Bristol. They don't have to be in the area. And also they want to be a friendly place when people go and visit the factory as well. So they've had some incidences where they've had lorry drivers show up, and obviously they're visitors, and they want to make sure that those visitors are welcomed.
Yeah, for sure. And it's an interesting one, that one, isn't it? I remember some years ago working for a very rural local authority, and I was going to be doing some diversity training with them and talking to the local councillors about this training, and they were saying, well, we don't need it. And I was saying, why don't we need it? And they said, well, because we don't have any Black people here.
Yeah.
And I said, well, actually you do, but they're in smaller numbers, which means that actually getting race relations right is more important, because those smaller groups of people can feel much more isolated.
Yeah.
But I said, actually, diversity isn't just around skin color. So you've got women in this area, haven't you? And they went, oh, yeah. And you've got disabled people in this area. And they went, oh, yeah. And I said, you've got gay people in this area. They said, no, we have no gay people in our area. I thought, you really need some diversity training. And I think there is that kind of, putting people in boxes and thinking, are we diverse? But even in a rural area like that, you'll have people who are parents, people who aren't parents, people who are single parents, people who are older, people who are younger. I mean, inclusion isn't just about the legal definition of those protected characteristics, is it? It's about, part-time working. It's about flexible working, which could be for someone who's doing an open university degree, for example, might be nothing to do with the protected characteristic. Yeah. But that's a much better place to work then for everybody within the organization.
Yeah, and to Abigail's point in the chat, around the kind of the importance of hidden diversity. This is quite an interesting conversation I had with this manufacturing client, because they were quite embarrassed actually that their factory is not wheelchair accessible, and I'm in a wheelchair, so I was going to go and do a half-day workshop with them, and we actually had to end up doing it in a nearby hotel because I can't actually get into their office, and that is something that they are addressing. But I said to them, it's not just about wheelchair access. You need to be thinking about accessibility for other disabilities. You could have autistic people working in your company, and they, to their credit, they've actually started to think seriously about all different types of disability in the factory. And we're doing a survey at the moment to try and find out.
There will be people there with disabilities that won't have necessarily talked about it. It's interesting how people see disability often as people in wheelchairs. Because, yes, that's a significant number of people, but it's only around 5% of disabled people. So what about the other 95%? And there's a lot that we can do, especially now with people working remotely. So it might be that somebody who has mobility issues with transport or with a building could perhaps work, from home or remotely. But as you say, there's all those hidden things, differences, which might be around neurodiversity, which might be about mental health conditions, could be about long-term health conditions that we're not familiar with. I think you're frozen.
Oh yeah, I'm here. Can you?
Oh, you're there. Good.
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah.
I thought you've either frozen or you've gone to sleep. I didn't think you'd gone to sleep. But yeah, it's those hidden things, isn't it? So that a workforce might not look diverse, but it will be diverse in all sorts of different ways. And it's making sure that we accommodate all of those other, hidden things. So if someone has a mental health condition or a learning disability, or they're dyslexic or they're autistic, that they are, they have their adjustments as well, which might not be around ramps and lifts. It'll be about completely different things.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely.
So if the audience would like to be thinking of any questions that you've got for later on, what do you think are the particular challenges for businesses coming up now, over the next 12 months or so? Now we're well into 2022.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges really is, I suppose, how businesses respond to an increase in demand, if you can put it that way. I'm talking to a lot of organizations who just say things like, I've known that diversity and inclusion has been around for a while, but it's only now that I think our organization needs to do something more seriously about it.
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
and it
better late
might
than
be,
never, I suppose.
yeah, and it might be that they had done some stuff, but it was very kind of hit and miss. And it wasn't really kind of fully integrated or embedded into the business. And I suppose they're now thinking a bit more kind of strategically about it. So that's that kind of thing. And I think, there's also been, I suppose, a response to things like, the Black Lives Matter movement,
Yeah.
conversations around gender equality following, what's happened in the Met Police, and Sarah Everard last year. That's put diversity on the boardroom agenda, I think, for sure. So I think challenge number one for a lot of businesses is, if we're going to do this properly and seriously, how do we do this? And how do we do it authentically?
Yeah.
And how do we do it where we're going to get good return on investment, or where we get it embedded properly? I think the other challenge really is also looking at how the pandemic has impacted on D&I. So we've seen the disproportionate impact of the pandemic on certain members of our society. There are questions about, okay, well, what does the new normal of work life look like? If we do operate in a kind of a hybrid model, how do we do that in an inclusive way? How do we make sure that people are not left out of the loop if they need to work from home? And I'm starting to hear those kinds of things more and more. Yeah.
I think the good thing about that conversation is that before the pandemic, somebody working from home as a reasonable adjustment for being disabled was kind of seen as but people who work from home just watch telly all day, don't they?
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden there's a global pandemic and everybody's working from home. Yeah. And I think that now it's gone from being a reasonable adjustment for a disabled person to an alternative way of working for everybody. And for me, the ideal would be that everybody now that can, it depends on the job, obviously, has that choice. So it's not that, all the disabled people can work from home and all the non-disabled people can work in the office. So we haven't got to worry about making the office accessible. That doesn't work because that's very much about segregation. And there'll be lots of non-disabled people who also want to work from home. And conversely, disabled people who like to go to work every day.
Absolutely.
So it should be about choice for everybody. And that's another example of where inclusion was something that was seen for, a particular group of people, but actually benefits everybody if it's done properly.
Yeah. I mean, loads of people have been benefiting from working from home, not just disabled people. But like you say, not everyone wants to work from home. Or we have to remember also that not everybody can work from home. And I think a lot of organizations that I talk to, they come from a bit of a privileged position where, a lot of their staff could work from home. But we have to remember there are so many people in the country that can't do their jobs remotely. They might work at distribution centers, shop floors, hospitals. And actually, a lot of the conversations I'm having with those clients, because they're like, a lot of my clients are like, well, somebody who has to work in a distribution center or like a factory floor, they can't work from home. So that's not very inclusive, is it? And I'm like, okay, they can't do their job from home, but there are things that you could do to make their role more inclusive. So there could be some flexibility around when they start and finish shifts.
Yeah, instead of everybody having to travel in the rush hour.
Yeah. And actually, half allowing somebody to start half an hour early or late can be a huge benefit to them if they've got caring responsibilities, for instance.
Yeah.
So it's those kind of things that could be considered.
Yeah, no, I think definitely. An interesting point just come up in the chat, which is about using the right language to support inclusion. And Deborah says that, here's people that say they're worried that they'll say the wrong thing. And I think that's absolutely central. I mean, I do think I am a glass half full kind of girl. And I think that most people want to be, fair and inclusive and do the right thing. But often we don't necessarily know how to do that or what that means. But also, I think there's a level of fear around what if I use the wrong word? And I know this has happened in race. I mean, I'm incredibly old. When I was young, we were taught, say coloured, don't say black. It's rude to say black, say coloured. And then we understood, oh no, you actually say black. And then it was, oh no, actually it's BAME. And then it was, no, it's not BAME, it's people of colour. And I think the problem is that you can get so hung up with, am I going to use the wrong word and offend somebody, that we don't talk about that subject at all. And it's the same with
Yeah.
disability. Do we call, is it disabled people? Is it people with disabilities? Is it, and actually, for me, we should be, language is important, of course. And there are certain things that we should avoid, like in disability, using victim language, so suffers from this, or is wheelchair bound, those kind of victim types of terminology. But I'd much rather hear somebody use an outdated term who's genuinely trying to open the doors and be more inclusive than someone who's learned all the language but still is putting barriers in the way. So I'd rather people didn't worry so much about saying the wrong thing. And actually the worst thing that can happen is you say the wrong thing and somebody says, actually we use this term now, nobody dies.
I agree. I mean, language is important. Like there's inclusive language that we should strive to be using. Some of the other day I did this kind of like live Q&A the other day, and somebody said that they'd got told off by the HR department for saying, hey guys, to the team. And we had a really good conversation about, whether if you address your team as hey guys, whether that's inclusive or not. But to Deborah's point, the key thing really is around fear. And I come across this a lot. And I oversimplify human psychology by saying that when you talk to a senior leader, there's three parts of the brain. There's the logical part, where they kind of connect with the logical argument for D&I. They like data. They might be thinking about the bottom line and kind of all the logical reasons. Then there's the emotional connection, which is they want to leave a legacy. They want their people to feel welcomed and empowered in the organization. They might have a personal connection to D&I, and so they really take it to heart. But there's this third part of the brain that we all suffer from, which is like this big red dot, which is what's going on in our other than conscious. And that's where we find things like our unconscious biases. It's also where we suffer from imposter syndrome and really the fear of saying or doing something that might cause offense or embarrassment that actually holds us back in having those, bold conversations that we need to have as inclusive leaders.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, we can have conversations about language and talk about what are acceptable terms these days. But actually, I think it is, it's better to make people feel empowered to ask is one thing, isn't it? What term would you like us to use is an easy one. But also just to say, I'm not sure what the right word is, but what I'm trying to say is X, Y, Z. And people will respect the fact that your intention, because for me, it's more about intentions than words. So if someone uses the wrong word, but they use it in a positive context, that's okay. If someone uses the wrong word and I'm not sure what their intention is, then we have a problem. So I think for me, it's about making sure that people know, what I'm trying to do here is make things better. And sometimes I'm going to use the wrong word. So forgive me and educate me, but I'm not going to stop talking about it because it's important. And I think that's what we should be doing. And we're all learning and things change all the time and we all make mistakes and it's okay.
Yeah. It's like, the one that comes up a lot is whether we say disabled people or person with a disability. And then, there's kind of obviously there's people sitting on both sides of the argument. I personally don't have any problem with being referred to as a disabled person, but I know friends who don't like that at all. And I think when you are, like you say, when you're working with somebody on a day-to-day basis, is just check in with them to find out what language they prefer.
No, for definite. And I mean, it is about everybody being different. And there are Black people in my generation who still refer to themselves as coloured, and that's fine if that's what they identify with. So I think it's it's about being sensitive and careful.
Yeah.
but not necessarily worrying about it so much that you don't talk about the subject at all, which is what's
No.
happened in the past, and which is why we are kind of where we are really. And
Yeah.
Abigail is saying that in the Demystifying Disability book, Emily talks about, everybody who identifies as disabled will have different standing. I know that people will say, I'm an autistic person rather than I'm a person with autism because it's politically part of my identity,
Yeah.
whereas other people will say, but there's more to me than my autism. And both of those are valid points of view, aren't they? And I just think they should be
Yeah.
respected as they are. I prefer disabled person because I like the social model, and I feel that we're disabled not by our conditions, but by the
Yeah.
barriers that we find around us. And we use the social model very much at Evenbreak, but we're not going to fall out with somebody if they say people with disabilities. We might
Yeah.
talk about the social model, but it's just a point of discussion rather than a
Yeah.
criticism or something that people should be frightened of.
Yeah. And it was the social model that actually hugely influenced the middle part of my book when I was talking about colleague experience, because that's, I've got personal experience of the medical and the social model. And then I really appreciate the social model way of thinking when it comes to my personal experiences of inclusion. And then I was thinking about, how could we actually take that social model further within businesses? And it's something I came across at Deloitte because, one thing that we were looking at is why we didn't have many women operating as partners at the top of the business. And when we did focus groups and things like that, none of the women said, oh, I think it's because I'm lacking in confidence, or I think it's because I don't have a good professional network. It's because the organization at the time wasn't very good at flexible or agile working. So that's the first thing that we looked at. We looked at making sure that the company had really good flexible agile working practices in place. And actually, we quickly realized that everybody benefited from it. The original, I suppose, use case, if you like, was to look at gender balance at partner level. But we, quickly realized that everyone was benefiting from it.
Yeah, another example of how inclusion might be introduced for one particular group, but everybody benefits. It's not that kind of zero-sum game, is it? It's if we make things better for one group, it makes it better for everybody else. And as you say, there will be a lot of men who will be put off leadership positions because they don't want to work 60 hours a week. They want to have time with their family or playing golf or whatever it is that they want to do. And it's a bit stereotypical, isn't it? But I think it is about, initially it's about, oh well, women and families and caring responsibilities, but actually men have caring responsibilities too. And and I think all of the things, when we talk about recruitment processes and employment practices, for me, it is about removing those structural or procedural barriers that are preventing whoever from getting to, whether it's long hours, whether it's flexible working, whether it's accessible buildings, whether it's accessible tech, removing the barriers that are preventing people from participating, whatever they are, is really what the social model's all about, isn't it? And I'm not abandoning the medical model. I'd love the medics to find a cure for pain that doesn't have horrible side effects. That would make my life a lot better. But I'm not a medic or a scientist, and most of the people on this call probably aren't. But what we can do is do things to remove those structural barriers that might be in our way, whether that's promotional prospects, access to training, access to jobs, access to recruitment processes. If all of those things are made open and fair for everybody, then that's real inclusion, isn't it?
It is. And if we think more in terms of like inclusive design, which is, that's the world that I came from when I worked in user experience and design, we can make the world better for everybody. So there was kind of a funny story a few years ago when I went over to Canada, and I had a meeting with CBC, the TV company. And as I was approaching the building, I noticed that at the main entrance, there was this post sticking out of the ground. And I looked at it and I was like, that's interesting. And basically what I realized is that you could hit anywhere along the post and it would open the door.
Oh,
and
wow.
I thought, that's really cool. I could push the post with my feet on my wheelchair footrest because I can't lift my arms up. I can't even push the buttons the automatic
Yeah.
opening door buttons. I was like, so I could open the door myself with my feet on my footrest. But before me, there was a FedEx guy making deliveries, carrying loads of boxes,
No
and
hands free.
he did it with his knee.
Yeah.
And at that point, I realized that is such a great solution. Like having this post sticking out the ground, like it wasn't just me that benefited from it. It was the FedEx guy in front of me that could use it as well.
Yeah, no, that's a great example, isn't it? And I think if we could translate that learning to everything else that we do, how can we have the recruitment, version of that post so that everybody can access recruitment and whatever that would be? That would be amazing.
Yeah.
Well, we're coming up to the hour. I'm just wondering if there are any questions or comments from anybody else on the call. I mean, this is being recorded, so you can look back at it later. But if you have a question or a comment in your mind, it's likely that somebody else might have the same question, or somebody watching the recording later on might. So please let us know of any questions or comments. Maybe you've got examples of good practice, where this has been working in your organization, or maybe ideas of what you could do differently. Because, I think, Toby and Evenbreak share a real desire to make the world of work accessible and inclusive to everybody, which actually helps, as we've said, the whole economy, everybody that's out there. At the moment, we've got this huge skill shortage going on, but actually there are also a lot of people looking for work. So how do we put those together without, the current talk of forcing people into jobs they don't want to do, which I never think is a good way forward. But actually helping people find jobs where they can thrive. And then it's not just about the recruitment, it's about the retention as well. So, getting people into the organization that are diverse is great, but then it's about what do we need to do to make sure that we keep that talent and nurture it, and that can progress. So, oh, excellent. Marie's just ordered your book.
Oh, lovely. Thanks, Marie. Thank you.
And Amy as well.
Oh, thanks, Amy.
Yeah, no, it really is. I mean, it is very practical. I mean, I think any books that talk about the why is important, because if we don't get the why there in the first place, nothing's going to change. And seeing that kind of business benefit of inclusion, rather than seeing it as a pink fluffy CSR thing, is really important. But then you've got to know what to do with that new desire to make things.
Well, we address the why in the first section, which is the first C of clarity. And in fact, I've developed a webinar which is called connecting with your why, and it was hugely inspired by the books written by Simon Sinek, Starting with Why. So he's what he says is, in effect, you've kind of got like this bullseye where you got why in the middle, and then what and how. Everyone works outside in. They kind of focus on how things should be done and what needs to be done, and then they don't connect with the why. But the most effective organizations connect with the why first, which is really difficult to do, because it's really difficult to articulate the why sometimes. So yeah, it's a good approach. So check out his book as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
But get mine first.
Yeah, lots of good books out there. I've written a couple myself.
Get mine after yours, Jane.
So yeah, I mean, I think I would encourage people, on the call this is a journey. It's not a tick box thing where you can say, well, I've done all of that now, so I can relax. It's something that we're all learning about all the time. And, hopefully listening to Toby has energized you and made you think that this is something that you can take into your own organizations. Toby's also not just great at writing books, but also, as you've heard, is a consultant. So if you need his support, I'm sure he'd be happy to have a chat with you. But, it's just about doing a whole range of different things within organizations, some of which can be tiny and some of which may be bigger, which actually make us think about, is this inclusive for everybody? And I think the starting point is that clarity. Where are you now? Where are you? Why are you wanting to go where you're going? And how are you going to make sure that inclusion and diversity really propels you along that journey? Because without it, it's going to be held back like an anchor. So thanks very much, Toby, for
You're welcome.
For coming along today. So is there any one gem that you would like to leave with, one tip that you would like to leave with people who just want their organizations to be more inclusive?
Yeah, I think that the thing that seems to be the tipping point in the clients that I talk to is making sure that you get the senior leadership team on board. I talk to so many organizations where basically the head of HR or the HR business partner is frustrated because they know that it's the right thing to do. But they are having a difficult job persuading the senior leadership team to genuinely take this on board. So anything that you can do to get the senior leadership team on board it makes your job easier after that.
Yeah, no, definitely. And often the people who are in charge of finance, because this can be a resource issue, and it isn't something that people can say, well, it's something nice, yeah, let's do that, but not if it's going to cost us anything. And actually it should be budgeted for and resourced in the same way that any other change manager. You wouldn't go through a whole upgrade of your tech without putting money into it and making sure you took people with you and got the right things in place. It's exactly the same in this case, isn't it?
Yeah, and the conversations that I have with people in HR is they often say to me, yes, we really want to do this, but it's going to cost a lot. And I say to them that, okay, yes, you have to put resources into it, people, finance. You have to put resource into this. But rather than thinking of it as a cost, think about what your return on investment is going to be. Because even if we look at something like, how much is it costing your business by having disengaged staff or having a high turnover, even if we can reduce your attrition or increase employee engagement, in one of my clients, they were saving hundreds of thousands of pounds if they could make a small improvement in employee attrition.
Yeah, and that's without thinking of all of the internal intelligence around markets and how do we make sure that diverse customers want what we're offering, and that's priceless, isn't it, really? So well, on that very positive note, thanks very much, Toby, and thanks everyone for attending, and we'll see you at the next one.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jane. Lovely to see you.
Thanks very much.